Hi, Arden. How are you? It's always good to see you.
It's great to see you. So, everybody, welcome to Philosophy Hall, a place where we discuss all things academic. Now, we've previously talked about graduate school applications. We have a great video on our channel that you can review, which talks
Yes.
about grad school applications in general. Everything from which locations to consider, to how many
Right.
schools to apply to, who to ask for your letters of recommendation. And in that video, we took a pretty general view. But what we've decided to do now is drill down much more deeply into the research proposal or the statement of purpose. Dennis, I know you've been getting a lot of questions right now from your students about what to include in a statement of purpose or research
Sure.
proposal.
Sure. Yeah. I like the way you said it too, is research proposal or statement of purpose. Depending on where you're applying, it could be the same document, it could be slightly different documents. There's also sometimes the personal statement, which is confusing. So today we'll speak more about specifically your personal statement or research proposal. It is the main document that explains why you want to go to graduate school and why you want to apply to a specific program, right?
Yes, exactly. So
Right.
everyone applying to graduate school is going to need to write one of these documents.
And so I read quite a number of these every year, probably an order of 100 or so every year. And so a lot of my experience with it is based on negative experience. I can tell you some of the common pitfalls and common mistakes that students make in writing their personal statement. So the first thing is that I think personal statement is a bit of a misnomer because people, when they hear personal statement, they think it's going to be like all about them and all about their history and all about why they love. So let's say you're applying and they're like, I fell in love with literature when I was 5 years old, and when I was 6, I wrote a poem. And a lot of it, often, it's all about them personally and
Mhm.
about their journey personally to graduate school, which is fine. It's nice to read, but I think what students should understand is that the journey they should be talking about is their intellectual journey. So it's not so relevant your childhood and even your specifics of your, like, how you chose your major, all that kind of undergraduate stuff is not so relevant. What you're trying to explain, what you're trying to do in your personal statement, in your research statement, is outline an interesting question in a field of research. And then it is interesting how you arrived at this question, at the research question. So that means you are first saying that here is a problem that is not being addressed in the field. It means that you need to a little bit show familiarity of where the field is. Is this just your problem and you just don't know the answer to it? Or is it a problem that the field has? Right? And that's a little bit, it's difficult to do as a younger scholar because you have to quickly outline some high level sort of research direction. It doesn't have to be a specific project, but it is a research direction that already begins to sound interesting and promising in terms of contributing something new to people who are already quite advanced and who know quite a bit about your topic.
Yes, I think that sometimes for students it can feel a little bit presumptuous or even artificial because let's say as an undergraduate you've taken one or two courses in the field of medieval literature and now you're going to pitch yourself in graduate school as a medievalist. Like that
Yeah.
sometimes might feel like you're taking on something that you recognize you don't fully
Yeah.
inhabit already. So be aware that people on the other side reading it, I don't think we're
Right.
expecting to see somebody who is coming up with a professorial topic, but at least the topic has to be well defined, thought out, and addressing an interesting field of research that is relevant and part of the conversation today. So it does require students to go and do some background reading and preparation in creating the research proposal.
Then what you want to see, I often think when I write, I think in terms of verbs. We want to use strong verbs. So try not to use like declarative statements like something is like this, like it's always it's difficult to sustain these to be verbs. You want to
Mhm.
have in your arsenal of verbs, you want to say things like, I build on the work of X. I'm influenced by XYZ. I push off of the topic. Point is, there's various things you can do in your research to think and note also the subject of your sentences should mostly be you. It's very, occasionally you can say, my research is located at the intersection. So the subject of the sentence there is my research. That's okay. But it is your personal statement. It is what it describes you as a scholar, and it's what you hope to enact in both in the field and in your own sort of development, where you see yourself developing to the future. That's what I meant about the direction. So you don't have to offer answers. You don't have to offer grandiose a thesis that's already like a foregone conclusion. You are truly thinking out loud about some interesting research problem and how you would go about addressing it for the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. When you're reviewing research proposals from master's level or PhD level students, do you see differences?
Look, to be honest, that's an interesting question. So we do have both a master's and PhD program in our department. And by the way, everything we say, we are both in the English, comparative literature, humanities oriented fields. I do some work in the social sciences, but really I think the advice we're giving is applicable across the board, and I think to a great variety of programs, master's and PhD included. But let's begin like this. If you can get into a PhD program where you're fully funded, you should. So often master students are looking to enter a master's program as a stepping stone to a PhD program. It's because they're coming from a place where maybe they were not quite prepared to do graduate level work at the top 10, top 20 institution in the United States. So often people from other countries, often people who went to like just smaller, excellent institutions, but they were just like smaller, they were not research oriented institutions. And so therefore they're looking to get that research experience under their belt. And because of that, the master's applications tend to be slightly weaker. They tend to be less about the field and less about research and more about their personal growth. Maybe a lot of the liberal arts colleges across the United States, of which there are many excellent places to be, but they don't speak the language of research. They're not talking about the contribution to the field. It's a lot about personal development. But the PhD program is not. It is about personal intellectual development. And ultimately, it is about you making a contribution to a field. It's about you finding an audience that will read your work, that will support your research. Later, they will peer review your articles and they will promote your books and so on. And so that you're already trying to get on that research publishing path, or at least outline of where it would lead you.
So picking up on two strands of what you've said. One is identity, because in a personal statement or statement of purpose, you will mention probably some things about yourself, but the document is not so much about your personal individual identity, but how your intellectual growth is informed by your experience and then the kind of project that you're poised to do as a result. So the identity piece is interesting because it needs to be included, but it should not be the main focus of your piece.
Maybe we can look at an example. So first of all, before I introduce this example, is that when you're applying to graduate school, I recommend to my students that they do not tailor their research statements to like multiple institutions. So if you're applying to 5, 6, 10, 12 schools, I would not write 12 different letters. I think people over tailor their statements and it makes them weaker because they're trying to target them to specific faculty. So you don't really have to do that. For example, when people apply to Columbia, I don't need to see my name to know that this person would fit well with me. I don't need to have my name explicitly mentioned. If you are in my field, if you're working on the topics I'm working on, that application, first of all, either I will see it or one of my colleagues will see it and they will forward me this application. You don't have to overdo it. So be yourself. You're trying to outline, let's call it a subfield. For example, I often do computational analysis. So basically, my colleagues know anytime they see somebody interested in computational anything, the application will end up on my desk. Arden, I know you do medical humanities. Anytime there is medical humanities interest, I know where to send the application. If I need to get someone in the field to see, is this person legit? Is this an interesting problem in medical humanities? I know who to ask. It's Arden. And you are trying to make that job easier. So if you remember from our last video, your application will be read by 3, 4, sometimes 5 people, and each one of them will rank it. And the first person who reads it, they're just trying to see, do we have 3, 4, 5 people who can read this application and give it some thoughtful response. Note also that this structure of having your application read by 3, 4, 5 people mirrors a potential dissertation committee. We're looking like, do we have enough? Is this profile of a student fits what our department has to offer? And it can't be one person. It's not, I know in some science fields, you're applying specifically to work in one lab. In many humanities and social sciences departments, you're building a committee of people who are there and who are going to help you. And you're trying to relatively quickly show that first reviewer who would be the reader of your application. So let me show now. So because of this, the first paragraph of your application should be just, it looks very similar to just like a high-level bio of the professors you're going to work with. And to learn how to position yourself in the field, how to position yourself, how to describe your research in that first opening paragraph, you should be going to departmental websites of places where you're applying to, and just other inspiring, more senior researchers, and learning from them how they describe their work. How do they position their research? Because in a way, your research statement is doing something similar, right? So you don't have to mention by name, but look at the profile and look at the kind of words and how I'm trying to like navigate this difficult, like I'm trying to describe something complicated in a relatively sort of short period of time textually. So let me show you this person. So this is Professor Bayumi from Johns Hopkins University, and she works in medical humanities. I find her work to be inspiring. So let's see how she describes her work in medicine, science, and the humanities program. So let's read this together. She writes, trained in political theory, political philosophy, and intellectual history, I work on the question of justice at the intersection of history, political theory, and science. Okay, so note, this would be like a stellar opening to your own research statement. You would say, trained in having graduated from this. And note that the positioning here is often like triangulated, like you want to present, it may be that you're working like squarely in one field, but here you have political theory, political philosophy, and intellectual history. It outlines this space in which research can be done. And right away I go, oh, who would be like a good collocutor for this person? Somebody who works I'm looking for somebody who works on political theory, in philosophy, intellectual history. Now, look how she continues. I work on the question of justice, okay? So I am motivated by questions of justice. Later on in your proposal, so imagine if this is the beginning of your proposal, which generally places you in this field. Within this field, what are you working on? You're working on the question of justice. Later on, you can explain, justice to me means XYZ. It will be a longer elucidation of what justice means, okay? Now, finally, we're getting, Arden, to your question, is how do you weave identity in kind of an elegant way, in a way that doesn't, so again, it's not about just who you are, but it's the parts of your identity that begin to influence your research. Professor Bayumi writes, growing up in Cairo, surrounded by both medicine and political activism, I later became interested in understanding how medical professionals' political leanings shape their medical practice, and how their medical expertise and practice shape in turn their political and social choices. So note, she managed in a very short space, and this is just her third sentence, she mentioned briefly that she grew up in Cairo and how her journey towards this professional field was informed by medicine and political activism. And this sentence here it strengthens the earlier, more abstract positioning, which was within political
Right.
theory and history of science and medicine studies. Right
Hmm.
away, you see, okay, you do see that there's some personal motivation, but again, it's done elegantly. It's done in
Hmm.
a way that makes sense. It's how you would introduce yourself, like in a conference or something like this, or in your bio,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. I am really impressed with this bio as well. It's unbelievably elegant in how much she's able to include elusively without having to spend a lot of time in description. And she's
Right.
gesturing both to her professional training, that's how she begins, and then gets into a more personal origin story in the milieu where she formed her first ideas and is able to capture both the professional and personal on a kind of continuum with each other.
And note the kind of words she's using. So she's saying, for example, I also became particularly interested in gender studies and post-colonial studies.
Oh,
So when you're describing your work, you're using these are, I would say, like subfields. There are subfields within literary studies, maybe within anthropology, maybe like sociology would have a number of different subfields. In history, every field has its own set of subfields.
yes.
And it's important that you speak that language, that you understand those categories, because those categories they structure our intellectual life. They're the categories, they're the kind of requirements you'll be asked to do. The graduate students, they will be found in the titles of journals. There is a
Yes.
journal of gender studies. There's a journal of
Hmm.
postcolonial studies. So your commitments to the subfield, they shouldn't be so idiosyncratic that like it's so hyper specific to you. You are here identifying your community. You are situating yourself within the community. So don't overcomplicate it. It should be visible standard names for what you do. And I think that will just make the passage of your application much smoother. Okay?
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think a tip that you can follow that's quite easy is you can look at some of the bios at the universities that you're applying to of the faculty, and
Right.
then you look
Yeah.
at the categories that people use to describe their own work. Usually, people
Correct.
have a kind of specific discipline or specialty that they have trained the most in, and then they have some secondary subfields or interests. And the kinds of categories recur. So, the second point that I noticed in what you said before, as well as identity, was intersection. I think it ties in well with your comment before that you don't want to apply to graduate school necessarily to work with one individual person. Although some disciplines require that more, I understand. But I think for your own mental health and survival in graduate school,
Right.
it's good to have a diversity of mentors. It's good to have a diversity of fields and options so that you can
Yeah.
move when the situation calls for it, when your intellectual journey calls for it,
Yes.
between the different fields. I think what you'll want to do is pick 2 or 3 areas and situate yourself at the intersection of those things. You might pick 17th century British literature, and then you might pick
Right.
poetry, and then you might pick eco-criticism, right? You create an interesting profile for yourself
Right.
through
Right.
the selection of the categories that you're
Yeah.
working in.
Eh,
And by keeping it pretty capacious, you then create opportunities for buy-in from readers of your application who say, okay, I might not work on 17th century poetry, but I can certainly advise on the eco-critical part of this application. And the
Right.
person has a
Right.
good idea. I
Yeah.
think you want to create opportunities for readers to become your advisors by
Right.
being
Yeah.
fairly capacious and smart about how
Yeah.
you define your categories.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And this is one common mistake I see being done is that, so for example, a student came to me the other day and they
Mhm.
wanted to work on literature and philosophy. And a lot of their graduate admission essays were like, here are the faculty I want to work with in literature, and here
Yes.
are the faculty in philosophy. And
Mhm.
though it makes sense, you're going to some place, and then let's say there's like a great philosophy professor you would like to work with, and you are able to invite them to your graduate committee. Usually, graduate committee can have somebody from outside of your department. It can have someone even from the outside of the university. From
Mm.
it could be another university. But the thing is, at this stage, this person is not reading your application. So the
That's
fact
right.
that there is like a strong interdisciplinary center somewhere on campus interdisciplinarity at this stage doesn't really help you because your application is evaluated by one department.
That's true.
And no matter how many times you say the word interdisciplinary, you still have to appeal to that core. You're establishing, think of it as like you're establishing an anchor, you are establishing a home, you're establishing a home within a discipline. So make sure that the subfields are first and foremost articulated in the terms of your home field. So in this
Yes.
case, philosophy is great, and philosophy has its own sort of, there's analytic philosophy, there's language philosophy, there may be issues. So something like an issue of identity in philosophy means one thing, identity in literary studies means another thing. But make sure that you are articulating the terms of your study in terms of your home discipline, because then
Yes.
later you can make that sidestep into another discipline.
So now I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I imagine I am the student coming in asking you this question. How specific do I need to be in the research proposal? Do I have to have my whole PhD dissertation already fleshed
Yeah.
out? And then
Yeah.
once I get to the university, are they going to expect me to deliver on exactly what I drafted
Right,
on the back
right.
of a
Yeah,
napkin?
it's such a good question. And this is the fine art of you want to find a balance. You don't want to articulate specifically, like exactly a research, like it's not a fully fledged research project. You want to indicate a direction that is
Yes.
specific, yet you have not yet committed to a title. And I think leaving enough room in your thought for the contribution of the department, for the contribution of your cohort, other graduate students, and yet not being too diffuse, and yet not being all of here's 12 things I'm interested in. That's
Hmm.
also too much, right? So
That's
you
right.
want to find and this is particularly in American and Canadian institutions. Now, in British institutions, for example, where you complete your master's degree first, and where
Hmm.
you're expected at the PhD level to come in with already, you're like more or less writing a proposal for one specific project. That's a
Correct.
different kind
Correct.
of an application. In the US and Canada, in the
Hmm.
humanities and social sciences, you tend to have this more, you are indicating a direction. It should be a
Hmm.
specific direction, but not so specific as to preclude any further development. Because then we'll say, what can we contribute here? This person already, they're so narrow and they seem to be like already experts in this field. Their mind is closed. We don't
Yeah.
see much where I don't see where I can contribute meaningfully to this project.
Yeah, you
You,
have to convey that you're receptive to being mentored and that your thoughts will be shaped by your encounters with your committee. That's something that has
yeah,
to come through the proposal. I just want to say
yeah.
a quick thing about Canada, just because I can speak to it, so
Oh
why
yeah,
not? Yeah,
you are
yeah, so
Canadian, right?
I am
Yeah,
Canadian, yes, and the Canadian system is, as with many things, a hybrid
yeah.
between the British and American systems,
Oh,
such
interesting.
that direct entry PhD programs are extraordinarily rare. And
Mm,
it would be extremely unusual that somebody would do that. It would be much more typical to do 1 to 2 years of master's level training first
mm,
before applying to a PhD program.
right,
In the United States, the direct entry from undergraduate studies PhD program is considerably more common. And there,
right.
you might pick up a master's degree along the way, and that's how it works at Columbia. But there would not necessarily be the expectation that you would complete a master's program first before enrolling in a PhD program. And then on the PhD side in a Canadian department, it might not be quite as long as some of the American programs. It might be like 4 to 5 years in the PhD phase. And you might be expected to drum up some of your own funding for that. It's real plus and minus.
Um,
Yeah, in contrast, the British system, the PhD is even shorter. It's only about 3 years long, I think.
yeah.
And that's after you've completed probably a 2 year master's that was pretty substantial. This is, I hear tell, I didn't do this myself, but one
Mm,
nice career path is to do your undergraduate where you do it, and then to do a British master's degree, and then to come back and do a PhD in the US. That's a very
right.
nice career track,
Y-
but take
Yeah.
that with a grain of salt.
Yeah. But that I think that speaks to that. Just to be clear, in the
Mm-hmm.
US, most PhD programs, you're coming in and you're taking 2 years. You're taking like sometimes it's called a sequential master's. So you're
That's right.
on the way to PhD, you're going to automatically get a master's. And that means that you're taking 2 years of courses. and probably you're also going to be teaching along the way. So
Mhm.
to your previous question is, how settled and how committed are you to like the things you promised in your statement?
Yes.
Well, of course, we expect you to change in those 2 years. We expect you to
Mhm.
take courses and develop new interests and deepen some of your commitments and maybe change them entirely. So once you're in, you're good. In a way, you get to reconsider your positioning. And I hope that your positioning within the field, those key terms and key concepts that drive your research, that they change throughout your career,
Mhm.
because we wouldn't be doing our job
Yeah. Yeah.
if you're not at all changing from
Yep,
the
that's
time
right.
you're coming in. And also, a lot of students don't feel like you have to immediately identify all the 100 things that make you so special and so smart. You don't need to show everything that you have in stock. So try to limit that positioning I've been talking about to 2, 3, 4 major, just like we saw on the faculty profile. It's a specific spot, it's well delineated, but I'm sure all of us have 100 different potentially interests. So don't try to
Right.
put everything in the kitchen sink into the
Right.
same application because you think something like, if you don't tell me about the fact that you are also into anime and maybe we'll do some, I don't know,
Yeah.
study on fan art, that could be your second project. That could be
Yeah.
something that, to
Yeah. It
me,
has to be plausible. That's true. Yeah.
has
And
to be plausible.
you want to seem like you have real focus while also again being receptive to new input and not too overbearing in your self-presentation.
Let me draw something for you. I think
Yeah.
spatially often, so let me know. I'm going to try to use this board.
Cool. This is a
Um,
first for us.
yeah, yeah, I'm trying. Also, I have a very weird mouse, so it's going to be hard to draw. But okay, we'll use this tool. So thinking spatially, so note in Soha's bio, we saw 3, 4 fields, right? What I often think of is like this triangle structure that I will try to recreate for you here. Here's one circle. I think I have to click. Okay, here's another one.
Hmm.
Can I move it? Wow, look at that. Here's
Oh, wow.
another. Yeah, I know. This is okay. All right. Yeah,
But
sorry.
viewers, you
First,
should know that on Professor Tennant's whiteboard in his office, it has these kind of diagrams.
I
This is really
always
a
do
very
this.
good way of working.
Yeah. So look, so you're creating this, let's call it a research triangle, where, so these are like, let's say, political theory, medical
Hmm.
humanities, and activism, right? So when in doubt, threes are good. People think in threes. Four is
Hmm.
already like maybe difficult. And note that if they're complementary in some ways, that's also great. And so this is what you're trying to articulate. You're trying to articulate that space defined by these subfields, right? So let's call them like subfield A, B, and C. Now, the other problem I see that happens all the time is that in addition to the subfields, your other main task for the research proposal is to give some specificity as to the object of your study. So,
Hmm.
okay, you're interested in activism and medicine and political theory. Okay, but are you going to study 19th century, 20th century? Is it going to be an American project? Are you going to look comparatively in different culture? What kind of methodology are you going to use? So, what
Hmm.
are you going to study and how are you going to study? Each of these fields should be pointing to a specific archive, a specific
Nice,
object of study, right?
nice,
In
nice, nice.
anthropology, in sociology, maybe you're studying a community. I have a student who's looking at communities which use AI fakes for political purposes. That's a
Yeah.
general idea, but where specifically are you going to look at for your answers? Are you going to look at Reddit? Are you going to
Hmm.
study Twitter? Are you going to look at legal cases? Are you going to look at fiction? All of those. So the archive and the methods of your study.
Yeah.
What are you going to look, what tools are you going to look, and where is this object of study located?
Hmm.
So the mistake I see people make is they'll say, I'm interested in political theory, let's say, and then it points, and they're like, this points to like a bunch of questions out here. Then I'm interested in medical. Then they say, I'm interested in medical stuff. Okay. And it points to something else here. And then
Right.
the point is, it seems like when you read this, it seems all over the place. It doesn't congeal into one particular project. And the shape you want more looks like this, where each part of your intellectual field commitments, they all should be pointing to the same spot, okay? So they all should
Yes.
be looking like this. Yeah. All right. So you are somewhere here in the middle is
Mm-hmm.
that sense of archive. Let's see, can I type archive? So this is like
Oh, yeah.
archive
Yeah.
plus method.
Beautiful.
Yeah, there we are.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So something like this, right? Now be specific. Where, when, who, what year, what location, what
Mm-hmm.
geography, right? So
Yep,
all of
that's
these
right.
questions should be answered throughout your research proposal because
Mm-hmm.
it helps us understand, oh, okay, this person, what gives specificity. As always, show, don't tell.
Yes,
Being
that's right.
specific about your archives, I say archive, it's archive is like object of study, like
Right. It
what you're
doesn't have to
studying.
be a doesn't have to be a cache of manuscripts in some library. Yeah, an archive.
Yeah.
Those are the objects of study. A term that sometimes is used in their writing courses is your exhibit. If you want to think in artistic terms, like
Exhibit,
what's
nice.
the
Yeah,
exhibit that
yeah.
you're going to be looking at. So
We're gonna
yeah,
put
so you have to define your object of study, your archive, your exhibit, and then the methods that you will use to interrogate it, analyze it, examine it, question it. And notice in saying that I'm using all of these active verbs, not that the archive is
right.
something, but that
Yeah,
I am going to do all these things to it in my method of approaching it. And
right,
you
right.
might have a combination of different methods. You might have a combination of close reading and historical analysis and literary critique of another kind. You can define your method in different ways, but you should at least allude in your research proposal to the kind of methods
Yeah.
that you'll be using.
Yeah, so imagine for each one of these nodes, you say to answer these kind of questions, I will be
Mhm.
looking at, like, I often do like a digital ethnography, for example. I had a paper on library genesis and like the pirate
Mhm.
communities that, I mean, Shadow Library, some of the largest digital libraries in the world. And so I would say to answer these questions, like what is piracy? What is intellectual property? How do people access information across the world? To ask questions like this, I will be looking at one of the most influential shadow libraries in the world called Library Genesis. Library Genesis was founded in 1990. And you go,
Mhm.
so note the transition here is to answer the questions. I will
Yes.
be, and then that gets you to this, that gets you to that middle part of the diagram. It's where and how are you going to look for things. In this archive, this online community contains 10 years. It's a forum board that contains 10 years of conversation. I'll be using computational tools to look at major trends or to outline a social network of
Mhm.
people participating and so on. So those are the transitions. Now, so I do recommend that you actually make a shape like this, something like
Mhm.
this.
Yeah.
Diagram yourself out. You are
Mhm.
a special star shape. You make a shape for yourself. Don't make it too
Mhm.
complicated. If it's one thing, it's okay. Usually people err on like too much. Now, look
Mhm.
how this can actually become the structure of your proposal. Paragraph one, you're going to outline, paragraph one will look like this, right? It's the
Right.
general introduction to this whole shape. And note how
Yes.
it like speaks in threes: medicine,
Mhm.
science, and humanities. Medicine, science, and humanities. Your paragraph one is that general kind of overview of what you're going to do.
Right.
Paragraph two, okay, what do you mean medicine? Paragraph two is going to be, my engagement with medicine. In my engagement with medicine, I build on the work of this person. My hope is to contribute to this conversation. You're going to build off, you're going to discuss some sense of an archive. Paragraph
Mhm.
three is going to be your second. You're drawing this particular edge. You're going to make that connection. Paragraph four is going to be your third part. I'm also interested. These questions bring us to the concern with political theory, because at the intersection of medicine and political theory is policy. And when I work with policy, I'm going to look at these documents. So let's say like legislature passed in Egypt between 1970s and so on and so on. So
Yeah.
note that's 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs that just really, you give the whole shape, then you walk the person more carefully throughout this structure. And by paragraph four, your last paragraph will reinstate the first paragraph.
Mhm.
And it will just talk about maybe the fit within the university, maybe
Yes.
other dimensions that you maybe expand into. The way you end it is a little bit up to you, but I would say restating, redrawing this particular shape is not a bad way to end. But
Mhm.
this gives us a very clear picture of who you are. It gives us a sense of the space where you want to be, the community, the kind of people, your audience, the kind of people you hope to write for, who will be
Mhm.
your potential co-locutors, your fellow travelers.
Yes.
And most immediately, it gives us a sense of where do I send this application now? I will send
Mhm.
this application to a colleague who works in political theory. I will send this application to a colleague who works in medical humanities. I will send this to a colleague who works on 1970s medical legislature. Right
Mhm.
away, I feel like, okay, I think this is a good fit. There's
Mhm.
enough here. There's a richness here, right? It's not so vague. It's
Yeah.
specific to three people who will be able to, in this department, to help you out in your journey.
Yeah, that's a beautiful outline. I have received some questions from students. How specific should I be? In mentioning external people? I'm inspired by the work of Michel Foucault. How much direct allusion should there be to names? And the other related question is, do I need footnotes for this document? Do I need citations in this document? No, I see.
Yeah,
My instinct is to say no. And I think
yeah.
allusions to specific names have to be done judiciously. You probably want a little bit of that just to help orient the reader and
Mm,
to show that you're conversant with trends and wider conversations, but it should not be studded with names.
yeah.
What's your observation of this based on
Well,
how many of these you've had to read?
yeah. Again, let's go from the negative
Right.
example. So people will name drop, and they will name drop very expected and somewhat like outmoded people. Oh my gosh, if
Mhm.
I have one more application that mentions Foucault, it's just get so it also
Yeah, I know.
shows
That's
me.
why I chose Foucault.
I know that there's
Yeah.
some names, so some names that are overused and they indicate a superficial, so you think you're being impressive, but
Yes.
actually it indicates that you've only scratched the surface and you've never gone beyond the surface. And also,
Mhm.
like you're quoting somebody whose work is now more than 50 years old, it's
That's
more
right.
than a half a century old.
Mhm.
I would say, so that's one mistake, is quoting too kind of superficially and too in a very expected way. The other mistake is to try to quote, it's what I said before, where you're trying to just quote somebody from the department. So I always get this, as Dennis Tenen wrote in his book, and it's slightly irksome to me when they do that, because I'm like, what? It's clearly are you actually sending this to every school? Or in every
Yeah.
school, are you finding that one person just so you can sound like you've read their work? And note also, don't do this just for your, as you said, for your sanity. You don't want to write
Mhm.
12 different applications.
No,
Write one.
no.
Okay, but so
And you
let's
can
talk.
tweak it a little bit. You can tweak
Tweak
it a
it,
little bit,
yeah, but
but it does
even,
it should be an integral project that would work at different institutions. Because think
yes,
of yourself on the other side of this and
yes,
applying to faculty jobs later. You don't want a project that would only ever be possible at one institution and not portable
exactly,
as you move through
exactly,
your
yeah.
career, right? Yeah.
But let's think. So we gave you like several things not to do, but here's the
Yeah. Oh.
positive thing to do is that cite someone
Hmm.
that is current. Cite young, exciting scholars who are working in the field now. And
Yeah.
that to me is the high level. It indicates that you actually know the field, the people who are writing about this today. The best application is I read it and I'm like, they
Yeah.
mentioned this person in medical humanities. When I'm done with this application, I'm going to go read them
That's
because
right.
that's so interesting. And that, so even though it doesn't have to be exactly what I'm working on, I'm excited to work with you because our conversations are going to be awesome. I'll bring whatever I have in my toolkit and you'll bring new and exciting directions, and it's a different configuration and it's going to be a productive conversation. So rule of thumb:
Hmm.
quote contemporary, younger people who actually inspire you.
That's great.
And
Yeah.
don't overdo it. I think one or two people, like I said, even you can make yourself a list of these terms. I build on the work of X. I
Yes.
use the concept of Y from Z. Point is,
Yeah,
you're
that's right.
showing that you're not speaking from in a vacuum. You truly are building on people's work. They for sure don't have to be in my home institution. I am.
Yes,
If
that's
you're
right.
in my field, you do computational analysis. Anybody who is working today, it's very likely I know them it's
Mhm.
very likely I'm excited about their work. And you
Yeah.
don't have to mention my name for me to know, okay, computational work, like we'll get along fine, we'll have a very
Mhm.
productive sort of experience together.
Now, I have to give the negative example from myself. Okay, this is my tendency I've had to suppress,
Yeah,
be that as it
yeah,
may. It's very tempting, especially if you're a junior person, a young person trying to carve out a space for yourself in this profession, to say, I will challenge and undo and prove
yes,
wrong
y-
other people. Yeah,
yes,
it's very tempting to want to do that. And especially in my early days of graduate school, I was very tempted to want to be combative because I really
yeah,
did
it's
know something that others didn't know.
right.
But that is absolutely alienating to people, and you shouldn't include it in your proposals. Fortunately for me, I had good
Yeah,
advising and I never did, but
yeah,
it was always my instinct to say, oh, yeah, I will
yeah.
challenge this
I was
dominant.
the,
Instead of that, especially if you're somebody who, thinks you have something to contribute, what you can do is say, I will build on this existing work. I will extend the discussion in these exciting
yeah,
new directions. It's the scaffolding on which I will elaborate something. There are
yeah.
different formulations for it, but you want to just be constructive, participating in the discourse, not challenging other people.
Yeah, yeah, I had the same look. I am sure my application was horrible. I probably made all of these mistakes. Please use us, use your other advisors, your support system
Yeah.
for advice. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's true. Always at every stage, I think being humble is important, but also don't overdo that either. Is that you
Yeah.
do want to have a strong sense of voice. If you think about actually being humble, asking questions, being vulnerable. Research should start with the true place of not knowing. Like, here is
Mhm.
something that bugs me. And I read a lot on this and I was so inspired by this work, but yet this question was still not answered. And this is how I'm going to answer it. You don't need to be like, oh, I know I'm only a beginning scholar. Like, don't say stuff
No,
like
no,
that.
no.
Don't, never
No.
talk bad about yourself. But it's what you said, be constructive, lean on other people to help you make your argument and then
Mhm.
show clearly how your argument is taking the field, is saying something new to the world. Don't be afraid to pull punches. Of course,
Mhm.
again, show, don't tell.
That's right.
If it's a
Yeah.
new and exciting point is all adjectives that are like subjective and they're just your opinion, just get rid of them. Show me how the direction, show me, and it takes, you have to take care. It's difficult to say that here is a question that hasn't been answered before, because you always have to contend with the possibility that it was answered before. You just
Yes,
didn't
that's right.
find it yet. And you don't
Yeah.
have room in the proposal to give the literature review. So
No.
that's why often a successful strategy is that you pick a person who's contemporary, who's exciting, who's your, it's that sort of fellow traveler mindset. Here's a fellow
Mhm.
traveler. I will walk with them for a bit. I'm inspired by them in this way. But then I'm going to take a turn. And where I would like to take this conversation is towards this. And then you can really make the statement your own and really strike out in some direction that will be, in some ways, new and exciting and so on. It's the impression that you wanted to make. You
Yes, I
know,
would. I just want to add one thing, which is you
absolutely.
show your confidence and your verve and your savoir-faire by the kinds of intellectual moves that you make as you're
Yes,
moving between those different circles of our diagram, the kinds of transitions you make between ideas, the kinds of contributions that you're pitching rather than using descriptive language about yourself
right,
or
right, right.
making it
Yeah,
about your personal identity or yourself,
yeah.
you show your confidence by the kinds of chess moves that you make in this research proposal, and it comes
Nice.
through
That's
without you
nicely
having
put
to,
too.
without you
Yeah,
having to say,
yeah.
oh, I'm only a lowly graduate student. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so note also that it also means you don't have to reprise like what classes you are taking. Note that
Mhm.
everything we've been saying, it's all about your research. The
That's right.
statement is about your research. Everything is in the service of this. And so try to, I know it's difficult, but try to inhabit that role of a researcher that's beginning a project. And if you are excited about it, if you are enthusiastic about it, if your mind is open, you're curious, you're reading widely, just try to get that feeling across. Be
Mhm.
yourself. Don't try to fake it. Don't try to gamify, over strategize. And I think that will make for a successful application. By the way, so remember, Our show is called Philosophy Hall. It's Philosophy Hall. This is the office hours of the Philosophy Hall. These are the kind of questions we often get in our office hours. And
Yeah.
so we want to bring that to a wider public. It's the kind of strategies to make you a more successful student, a more successful researcher, a more successful scholar in general. But that also means that we appreciate your feedback. If you have questions to ask of us, please comment, subscribe, and so on, and we'll see you around. Thank you so much for listening. And Arden, I'll
Thank
see you
you.
later.
I'll see you later. Take care.
Bye.